Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our last session. My name is Ian Kilburn from Vermont Emergency Management, and this is the Watch Officer Program presentation presented by Brett LaRose, who is the Operation and Logistics Section Chief here at Vermont Emergency Management. So without further ado, let's get our last presentation rolling here. Brett.
Thank you, Ian, very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here virtually and kind of in person. It's kind of strange. I'm sitting here in a room alone, and I know there's a room of people and those of you out there in the virtual world. But regardless, it's good to be here and talk a little bit about the Vermont Emergency Management's Watch Officer Program and how what we offer and how we can support you. As Ian noted, Brett LaRose, I'm the Operations and Logistics Chief at Vermont Emergency Management. There's a couple of my other regular responsibilities at VEM is I fill the role of the Watch Officer Program Coordinator, as well as I fill the role of the state's Emergency Management Assistance Compact Coordinator. So the Watch Officer Program, what do we do? How can we assist you? So we are on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we are here to receive and triage calls for any type of incident in which the incident has kind of gone beyond a local ability to effectively respond and you require additional assistance. Or we are also here for the purposes of reporting. We receive calls on weather-related incidents, hazmat-related incidents, spill calls. As most of you probably know, there's a requirement for reporting spills in the state of Vermont, hazardous materials, spills of 2 gallons or more. And those calls are triaged by the watch officer after regular business hours and on weekends. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on in the presentation, but also it's our responsibility to regularly check in on pertinent websites and ensure that our leadership in state government and public safety are aware of any situations or developing situations that are occurring. Today, we're currently a team of 6. These 6 individuals here, which includes myself, we fill week-long tours. So Monday at noon to Monday at noon, each one of us is on call 24/7. We wear a pager. If you call the 1-800 number, that rings into the public service answering point in Westminster, where the emergency communications dispatchers triage the calls, and if the assistance of the watch officer is needed, they in turn page us through our alphanumeric pagers we all wear. Just want to talk a little bit about a couple of the responsibilities, the duties of the watch officers. Of course, we're responsible for that collection and coordination of time-critical information that we receive from various sources. It could be media outlets, could be other governmental entities, other emergency services organizations, and is our responsibility to provide any early warning or response or other guidance that may be needed. We need to obtain, analyze, and prioritize this data, and we want to make sure that the information gets to the persons or the organizations, the divisions, the departments, the teams that need this information. Again, I'd like to emphasize that one of our primary roles as a watch officer is to receive that incoming information and triage it, if you will, and ensure the appropriate entity receives it so they can act upon it. We conduct, facilitate briefings and provide, critical information to decision makers in state government. One example of this would be when there's a pending weather event, and leadership over in human resources is thinking they might want to consider possibly a delayed opening of state office buildings, because of a snowstorm, or possibly an early release for the same reason. The Vermont Emergency Management Watch Officer, once that decision's made to have such a conversation, the watch officer facilitates the conference call with key leadership from public safety, from human resources, from the governor's office, transportation, Vermont State Police, buildings and general services, and others, so those leaders can make informed decisions on what direction they want to go in. So that's just one role that a watch officer fills. We also we participate in the state's coordination and management of initial emergency response support. So if there's an event that's unfolding, support is needed at the state level, the watch officer is handling that through cooperation with our other state partners, with our director's office. And if the decision is made for an activation of the State Emergency Operations Center for a no notice type event, the watch officer would be a key participant in those procedures, as far as alerting state emergency operations staff to the impending activation. Watch officers need to maintain proficiency in many modes of communication, many of these which we have regular access to if needed. Excuse me. We want to ensure, again, our state partners have access to any emergency warnings, such as severe weather events, hazardous materials spills that are occurring. We need to understand and know how to operate two-way radio communications equipment, of course, our smartphones, satellite phones. There's been a lot of talk, I know, during our keynote presentation, Mr. McCain was talking about redundant communications. How are we going to communicate with key persons, key organizations, when such an event would occur, where we might have to utilize communications equipment that we don't regularly use, such as a satellite phone. The watch officer is issued a satellite phone, as our other key state partners, just to provide that mechanism to us for the purpose of communicating when other communication lines are down. We need to understand our WebEOC, our Emergency Operations Center system software, how that works, and also understand and utilize our Vermont Alert notification system for disseminating messages. We utilize, as we are right now, we're utilizing video calling or Microsoft Teams. This is how we do much of our business day to day. It's a way, if providing comms are up and we have power, this is a great way to quickly bring key persons together so they can begin looking at the bigger picture and make decisions on what direction we're going to go in for any particular incident. Another one of the responsibilities at Vermont Emergency Management is managing the state's emergency alert system. So the best way I can describe that's the interruptions in your regularly scheduled broadcasts that occur every month. The banners that go across our TV screens, or the transmissions that interrupt the radio station we were listening to. As I always like to say to all my friends, yeah, that's us that are doing that here at Emergency Management. I don't mean to make light of that at all. It's obviously a key component of our redundant communication systems that help ensure we have the systems in place to be able to disseminate critical, time-sensitive information to stakeholders and the residents of the state of Vermont of something that's unfolding. The watch officers must have the ability to utilize the software that is used to send out these messages, and when requested to do so, would be responsible for executing such a message. any other business, we follow standard operating procedures. We have procedures to handle just about any scenario that could be thrown our way. And of course, just when you think you have a procedure for everything, something new pops up. But regardless, it's important for us to have procedures, these quick reference documents that we can go to ensure we are following the necessary steps and engaging with the appropriate people depending on the particular incident that's occurring. Again, we may be engaged in a drill, an exercise, or of course a real world event. We're responsible for handling and disseminating sometimes sensitive information. And of course, one of our priority responsibilities is that maintaining situational awareness of what's going on around the state. Incidents, again, that are unfolding, occurring, just so we can keep our leadership informed of these events, so they're not finding out about it through other mechanisms. We want them to have the most current information, so they're not caught off guard, and it can give them advance notice on making decisions. Some of the incident types which we respond to, this is just a small example, but of course, hazardous materials incidents, communication outages, agriculture incidents, of course, activation of the State Emergency Operations Center. We are here to support other state agencies, after hours. When these types of incidents come up that require engagement with, again, this is just an example of some of the state agencies we might work with, but we're responsible for ensuring, again, the information gets to the appropriate persons. As an example, just today, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with the disaster animal response team folks and, hear a little bit about the services they provide. But again, it's how do I access that resource as a watch officer? So, there's memorandums of understanding or agreements in place, and we have procedures that say if the watch officer was to field a call where persons were requesting such support from a disaster animal response team, we would go to the Agency of Agriculture, which is our pathway to such special teams. So again, that's just one small example, but again, it's important that we have procedures and that we follow them to ensure the appropriate people are always in the know. So a typical watch officer tour of duty, as I noted, it's Monday at noon to Monday at noon. This same schedule aligns with the Vermont State Hazardous Materials Response Team crew chief, who is also on standby for the same period of time. They're just one of the persons we regularly work with off hours. In addition, we work with the Agency of Natural Resources spill team representatives who are on standby as well. Their schedule is a little altered from this. They work Wednesday, 8 a.m. on Wednesdays to 8 a.m. on Wednesdays. But again, this is what a regular tour of duty looks like for the Vermont Emergency Management. Some of the actions that are required of the incoming watch officer, if you will, is to schedule a pre-tour briefing with the current watch officer. This is our opportunity on that Monday morning to sit down for a few minutes with that watch officer who's getting ready to wrap up their week-long tour to find out, so what has been going on. Are there any open incidents that watch officer is going to need to pass off to the incoming watch officer for any follow-up that may be needed or reporting? We want to ensure that we have system access to WebEOC, to Vermont Alert, just so if asked, we know we don't have any issues with those systems. And we also want to ensure we're connecting with those other state partners who are on standby, as I just mentioned, like as an example, the hazmat crew chief, the ANR spill team representative on call, just say, hey, just letting you know, even though they got an email already, that I'm on call, So you'll be working with me if anything comes up. So throughout our tours.
Hey, Brett.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to derail you here, but there was a hand raised in the chat here.
Yeah, please interrupt me because I can't see that, Ian. So please ask your question. Ian, are you able to read that question to me?
It was not in the chat. It was just someone who'd raised their hand. It's since gone down, so I think we're okay.
Okay. It's certainly, if you do have questions and they're not being addressed throughout the presentation, please enter those into the chat so we can get back to you with a response. So again, as our ongoing tour, watch officers, as I noted, we wear a pager, and it's our responsibility to respond to those pager notifications. We distribute a daily situation report. Perhaps many of you on this call are recipients of that daily situation report. And what that is really is a high-level overview of what has occurred in the previous 24 hours. As an example, if there was a spill reported in Rutland, we would note the town and or the city name in the report, the spill, the type of product, the approximate quantity, and any other organizations, agencies, partners that were notified of the incident. And we would also know if there was any resources deployed. So, and as an example, if the hazardous materials response team was requested by a local fire department to respond to support an operation, that crew chief would make the watch officer aware of the type of request that has come in, the resources that are being deployed, and that way, in turn, the watch officer can inform the Vermont Emergency Management Director's Office of this deployment, because that person has a responsibility to inform their leadership, our commissioners and such, of such deployment of state resources. Again, monitoring, that's very important. We do cursory checks periodically throughout the day, just to check in on, we check the National Weather Service sites, other social media sites, Channel 3 as an example. Again, it's not that news and information isn't readily available to every one of us just through all the different modes of communication and social media platforms. But again, it's all about, staying informed and reading into certain types of incidents and understanding based on experience what may happen or could occur, and bringing that information to our leadership's attention. Again, just from experience over the years, I've always found, they would rather know than find out after the fact through another pathway. Another responsibility of the watch officer is to facilitate a weekly test of our Vermont Alert notification system. That system is obviously, we utilize it to send out emergency notifications, but it's also the platform we utilize to notify our State Emergency Operations Center staff of an activation. So spill reporting, this is probably the type of incident in which we are involved with the most. I'll use local businesses who perhaps handle hazardous materials, or an emergency services organization is out at an incident, and they're estimating the quantity of a particular product. Let's say motor oil has been spilled. We have a responsibility, a reporting requirement in the state of Vermont. If it exceeds 2 gallons, we're required to report that. So if you're a local fire department, you would call the hazmat hotline, that number there in red, to report that. And it's you're not, just because you're calling it in, it doesn't necessarily mean you are requesting assistance with the cleanup of such material, because typically a fire department would have the ability to mitigate a small spill such as that. But again, that responsibility of reporting, and by reporting it, that information then, if it's off business hours or on the weekends, it would find its way to the watch officer. Well, even during business hours, it will find its way to the watch officer. And we, the watch officer, in this particular example, we have a responsibility of informing the Agency of Natural Resources of the incident, because they track these spills and maintain reports and records. And if there's any follow-up that is needed, perhaps assistance with hiring a cleanup contractor, if it's a significant spill, the Agency of Natural Resources, could assist with that. This sheet here, this little information, quick reference guide sheet, if you will, that's put out by the Agency of Natural Resources. As a first responder myself in my local community, I find this information very helpful, just to keep it handy in the emergency vehicle. It just kind of gives me an idea of what I'm responsible for as a responder and who to call. So I put this in this presentation because I'm quite confident there's probably many first responders on this call, because I know many of us wear multiple hats in our communities. So, but this is a great reference sheet, and certainly if this is something you would like access to, please reach out and let us know, and we can share this with you. But again, just initial, kind of mitigation things we can do as first responders, and just as equally as important, provides the hazardous materials hotline number for reporting and or requesting such resource support from the hazardous materials response team. We, the Vermont Emergency Management Watch Officer, can also be the pathway to Vermont Task Force 1, our state's urban search and rescue team, swift water capabilities. As I found, again, through experience, the program manager for this, for Vermont Task Force 1, Mr. Mike Cannon, he typically knows about things before the watch officer does anyway, but he's always very kind to share that information quickly with us, because Vermont Task Force 1, like hazardous materials response team, if that particular resource has been requested, resources deploying, the watch officer has the responsibility of notifying our state leadership of such a response. So again, they can inform their leadership that state resources are being deployed to support a particular incident. But again, if you need such resources, urban search and rescue capabilities or swift water capabilities, you would call that 1-800-347-0488 number. And that would ring at the Westminster PSAP. Again, the emergency communications dispatcher would triage it, and then if it's a request for Task Force 1, they're going to pass it to the watch officer. Another resource that can be accessed through the Vermont Emergency Management Watch Officer is support from Vermont Wildland Fire Control. So the state has 2 reps, one covers the north and south, but again, thinking of the local response to, you have a small working wildland fire, forest fire occurring, and you're getting stretched pretty thin. You've exhausted your ability to effectively respond. You've exhausted your immediate mutual aid resources, and you think you might need a little bit more assistance. The state has some capabilities. They are able to bring some resources, some tools to bear, such as forestry type pumps, forestry hose, obviously. Now what they are not able to bring, unfortunately, is an army of people. They do have some persons they can reach out to, a small team to help support and mitigate whatever situation we're dealing with. But the state currently doesn't have like a wildland fire team. But again, there are resources to assist local communities when they're dealing with such an incident, and to access those resources, you can call the Vermont Emergency Management Watch Officer, and we can help connect that local emergency services organization with the appropriate person from Forest Parks and Rec, either Mr. Dan Dillner or Mr. Lars Lund. WebEOC, so that again is our emergency management software that we utilize not only to manage our incidents when the State Emergency Operations Center is activated, but it's also the tool that the watch officer uses daily for two purposes. Well, the first purpose would be to maintain an activity log. So watch officers, again, they have to complete certain tasks throughout the course of the day, and of course we are paged periodically about an incident, but we log the times of those tasks we completed, or log the times of the incident that is occurring in an activity log in WebEOC. Now that activity log, for those of you who are WebEOC users, that's only seen by the watch officer and our leadership. It's a great way for us not only to track what we did through our day and week-long tour and always have that to refer back to, but it's also a place where our leadership can go and say, okay, so this is what the watch officer did during the course of his or their tour. But also, when there is an actual incident that occurs, such as that 2-gallon oil spill example I gave earlier in Rutland, we would not only note that in our activity log in WebEOC, but we would also create an event and post it to what's called the significant events board in WebEOC. And then the significant events board is visible to those who have an account on the WebEOC system. So those you that are, well, you're curious about the incident and what was reported for something that occurred in your area, or you just are generally interested in what types of incidents are being reported on throughout the state of Vermont, this is a great reference to go see some very, again, basic high-level information of what occurred at that particular incident. So as we wrap up our tours, again, there's going to be a change of tour briefing with the incoming watch officer and our opportunity to transfer any open incidents to that individual. Just as I'm wrapping up here, I just got a couple more minutes, but I think it's worth noting that the State Emergency Operations Center has two levels of activation, a partial and a full activation. And when the State Emergency Operations Center is not activated, the watch officer is always monitoring, maintaining that state awareness of what's going on. And it's really if there's something that's going to reach the level of a partial or a full activation of the SEOC, the watch officer is the person who is going to initiate that response and getting to that level. So I just really emphasize the importance of this particular position. We talked a lot about their role and their responsibilities, but again, in the event you need support because you've exhausted your ability to respond to something at the local level, or perhaps you have a question, you're the local emergency management director, something's occurred in your community, maybe there was some flash flooding in your area, there were some roads washed out, and you're looking for some support, maybe you just quite don't know what to do in the situation, you can always call the 800 number, and the watch officer, if they don't have the answer, they can put you in touch with the person that does have the answer. And also it's important to note that, if it's in a life-threatening type situation, that we always want to dial 911 for those types of incidents. We, the watch officer, the 800 number, we are not a dispatch center. We're not the boots on the ground people. We do have access to those persons who do respond, but if you truly have an emergency, it's important to kind of reiterate that 911 is the avenue to get the resources you need immediately, such as EMS, fire, law enforcement. So, does anyone have any questions? Welcome them.
Any folks in the room with questions? Okay, sir?
Hi, Brad. It's Bob O'Sullivan from FEMA Region 1. So, excellent presentation. Thank you for doing that. And a couple of questions. When we have our liaison officers or our watch officers report, we ask them to report essential elements of information, EEIs. And I think you've given a few examples of those. Could be oil spills, and of course, maybe a accident on an interstate that would shut it down. And also, if there's some threat to communications, do you use EEIs or similar? Do you have a checklist of what should be reported and what shouldn't?
I think what we use is that model, and when the state emergency operations is activated, but just following our day-to-day procedures, I think what we're doing is capturing those essential information.
Hey, Brett, you're kind of cutting in and out.
Is this any better?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I apologize. So yeah, what I was saying was when the State Emergency Operations Center is activated, we certainly capture essential elements of information. However, when the watch officer's on duty, we're capturing that same information, but I guess we're just not calling it EEIs. But through our procedures and our processes, just by the way those are laid out, we're capturing and sharing such information.
And Brett, if I may, to add on to that, we do have essential elements of information that we report to our director's office. So there's certain things that they do want to be notified about, whether that's going to be a phone call or just a follow-up email notification to them. So we do have that process for, letting the boss know.
Yep.
Yes, thank you for that, Ian.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the room or online? Sir, in the back.
So if I wanted to let people in town know something bad is happening to 211, would I call the watch officer? Like BT alert type thing. Are they an avenue to get out of BT alert?
Yes. No, so Brett, the question is the watch officer an avenue to issue a VT alert? And I will let you answer that.
Yes, absolutely. So some communities may have a trained dispatcher, as they're called, a VT alert dispatcher, to disseminate such messages. However, if that community doesn't, or maybe if the person has had training and feels a little rusty, the VEM watch officer is always an avenue to request such a notification to be sent out. Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Several years ago, I was at a VEM training for amateur radio operators, and they explained that amateur radio operators or any other element of VEM was not supposed to self-dispatch, and it would go to the watch officer. So if it was not possible to reach the watch officer because of a communications failure, we were told that a state police station commander could do that on behalf of the VEM. I'd like to know if that's still true.
Brett, were you able to capture that question?
I apologize. It's really difficult to hear.
Okay. So I'll reiterate it. So years ago, this gentleman attended a conference, I believe, right? Conference or a talk, a training. And the amateur radio operators were always told not to self-dispatch, and that request would flow through the watch officer. But if there was some sort of communications outage, what was in place in the past was the station commander for the state police could also authorize that. So the question is, does that process still exist? And if not, what is it?
So the question is, does the process still exist if the watch officer was unable to communicate the need for RACE's radio operators? Is it permissible for those operators to deploy to Vermont State Police Barracks?
No, I believe the VSP station commanders, the barracks commanders, would then be the de facto authorization for RACES operators, correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't have a clear answer. That is an excellent question. Can we please, Ian, can we capture the gentleman's name and number so we can follow up with him?
Absolutely.
I think that might be in the RACES handbook.
Maybe. I'm sure. Yes.
I'll add my name to that list too.
Okay.
Also, the numbers that were shown on the previous slide, the phone numbers would be the ones to call the watch officer. Are they also where we would call during normal business hours?
Yeah, so Brett, the question is, are these numbers also for normal business hours? And
Yes, during Monday through Friday during regular state office hours, we call that 800 number. It's answered by the Vermont Emergency Management Administrative Assistant. And if they're not available, the person who's working at the front desk. But yes, when you call that number during business hours, it rings there, and then it's their responsibility to contact the watch officer. And then at the end of the business day, that number is transferred to the Westminster Public Service answering point. So for the next 16 hours, the emergency communication dispatcher will answer and triage those calls.
any other questions? Anyone on the line? We kind of hogged it up on the in-person. So anyone remotely? Okay. Sounds like none. Any other questions from the room? Okay. I'm hearing none, Brett.
Okay. Well, again, thank you all very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us the last 2 days and to be with me for the very last presentation of the day. This is my contact information, my email address. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to me regarding, emergency communications equipment at Vermont Emergency Management or about the Watch Officer program in general. I'd be happy to be a resource for any of you. So, but again, thanks all for being with us this afternoon, and I wish you all well, and I hope we all cross paths soon. Take care.
Brett, there is one last quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's always one guy who's never leaving. Do what gas stations know about this 2-gallon requirement, and do they get called directly, or am I going to go and piss them all off by telling them that they have to report these to me?
So if I think I heard that, do gas stations know about the reporting requirement?
Yes.
Is that the question?
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Yeah. As far as their licensing and certification, yes, they're all aware of that. I can't sit here and say that type of information is shared with, all their new employees and attendees as turnover occurs in such facilities. But I mean, it is a requirement, that 2-gallon is the requirement for reporting in the state of Vermont, and they all have a responsibility to do so.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We really appreciate it. If the request for feedback email has not gone out, it should go out shortly. There's also a QR code for everyone that is here that's upstairs on one of the sandwich boards. You can scan that, fill out your feedback. We would greatly appreciate it. And again, I also would like to thank everyone for being here, either virtually or in person for the last 2 days. It's been great conversations and great presentations, so thank you.